I will never forget the sound of a nail, or a claw, slowly dragging along the outside of my tent. It wasn't a sharp tear of fabric. No. It was slow. Deliberate. Exploratory. As if someone were testing the tension of a string before deciding how to play it. I lay inside my sleeping bag, barely breathing, watching the thin nylon bow inward just 10 centimeters from my face, outlining the shape of something that looked like a long, knotted finger. In that moment, I understood, everything separating me from death was a millimeter of synthetic fabric, something that could be sliced open with an ordinary kitchen knife. Many people think camping is romance, campfires and stars. For me, it's now a reminder of how fragile our world is, and how easily we cross a line beyond which we are no longer welcome. This story really happened to me, and ever since then I sleep only with my windows tightly shut, even on the 5th floor in the center of Moscow. Turn off the lights. This is a true story. It all started with the idea of escaping the Moscow heat. It was August 2016. Melting asphalt and suffocating subway stations made life unbearable. There were 4 of us, me, my best friend Dima, his girlfriend Katya, and Ilya, a quiet, slightly strange guy, but dependable on hikes. We studied in the same program and had long planned to get far away from civilization, somewhere phones only catch a signal if you climb the tallest pine tree. We chose Lake Svetloyer in the Nizhny Novgorod region, a legendary place wrapped in myths about the invisible city of Kitezh. People said the water was holy, that the lake was sentient. But we were cynical engineering students, mysticism interested us last. We wanted silence, forest, and cool air. We arrived near evening. We left the car at an improvised parking area at the edge of the forest and continued on foot to find something more secluded. The main tourist beach was crowded, children shouting, music blaring from open car doors, the smell of grilled meat. We wanted wilderness. Let's go around the lake, Ilya suggested, adjusting the straps of his massive backpack. There are old campsites on the far side. The casual weekend crowd never makes it that far. It sounded perfect. We followed a narrow trail winding between towering fir trees. The forest around Svetloyer really is special. The trees stand like a solid wall, their crowns interwoven so high above that eternal twilight reigns below. A thick carpet of moss and fallen needles cushioned our steps, swallowing sound. The farther we went from the parking area, the quieter it became. Human noise faded, replaced by the whine of mosquitoes and the occasional crack of a branch. We found the perfect clearing about 50 meters from the water. Dense bushes surrounded it, forming a natural, cozy pocket. The view of the lake was breathtaking. The water was black and motionless, like a mirror already beginning to reflect the first stars. While we pitched the tents, one for me and Dima, another for Katya and Ilya, I noticed something that seemed insignificant at the time, but now makes me shiver when I think about it. There was no trash. None at all. No old fire pits. No wrappers. No trampled grass. As if no one had stopped here for years, despite how perfect the spot was. Cleanliness is next to godliness, Dima joked, hammering in a stake. At least we won't be sleeping on someone else's cigarette butts. We made a fire and cooked dinner. The evening went great. We told stories, talked about school, laughed. But as darkness thickened, the conversation slowly died. The forest around us changed. By day it had seemed majestic, by night it became a black, impenetrable wall. The firelight revealed only the nearest trunks. Everything beyond 3 meters drowned in dense, sticky darkness. Around midnight, I went down to the lake to get water for tea. Standing on the shore, I heard a splash. Not the light sound of a fish breaking the surface, but something heavy and dull, like a sack of sand thrown into the water. I shone my flashlight, but the beam dissolved in the blackness without reaching the bottom. On my way back to the fire, I ran into a local fisherman. He appeared out of nowhere, stepping out of the bushes so quietly that I flinched. He was an old man in faded camouflage, holding a fishing rod patched together with electrical tape. "You staying the night here?" he asked. His voice creaked like a dry branch. "Yes," I said, trying to sound confident. "Is that a problem? Is this a reserve?" He looked at our fire, then at the tents, then into the dark forest behind us. "You can. But you shouldn't have set up so close to the old causeway." "Why?" I asked. "You're loud. And they like quiet." "Who's they? Rangers?" The fisherman smiled strangely, baring yellowed teeth. "If only. Don't go out at night unless you have to. And don't let the fire go out." He left as suddenly as he had appeared, dissolving into the darkness. I went back and told the others. We laughed. Local crazy. Scaring city kids. Probably a poacher afraid we'll report him. We convinced ourselves of that, put out the fire to avoid drawing attention, against the old man's advice, and went to our tents. That was our first mistake. I woke up abruptly, as if shoved. The time was 2:40 a.m. The tent was stuffy, smelling of heated nylon and mosquito repellent. Dima slept beside me, breathing softly. At first, there was silence. Absolute, ringing silence, the kind that makes your ears feel clogged. A forest is never truly silent. There's always wind in the canopy, insects, a distant owl. But now it was as if the forest had died. Or was holding its breath. Then I heard it. Crack. A sharp, dry sound. Someone stepping on a branch. Not deep in the woods, but close, maybe 10 meters from our tent. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs, pounding in my throat. Moose, I thought. Or a boar. There's plenty of wildlife here. Then came a second sound. It wasn't the chaotic movement of an animal. It was a step. Heavy. Measured. One step, a pause of a couple of seconds, then another. Someone, or something, was walking around the perimeter of our clearing. The footsteps were strange. It sounded barefoot. No shoes. No hooves. Just the soft, wet compression of moss and the crunch of branches under great weight. I nudged Dima. He grumbled, turning over. "Shoo," I hissed. "Quiet. Someone's out there." Dima woke instantly. Sleep peeled off him like a shell. We both went still, listening. The footsteps came closer. Slap, crunch, slap. It was circling our camp in a perfect loop. Not approaching the tents directly, but not leaving either. Like a predator herding prey into an invisible cage. "Maybe it's Ilya, going to take a piss," Dima whispered. His voice trembled. "Ilya walks like an elephant in boots," I whispered back. This is something else." The steps stopped. Right in front of our tent entrance, maybe 5 meters away. We saw nothing, only the gray fabric of the vestibule faintly lit by moonlight. Then I smelled it. Not forest freshness. Stagnant water. Algae. And something sweetish and rotten, like raw meat left in the sun. Suddenly, from the neighboring tent where Katya and Ilya slept, came a muffled cry. Katya. She had woken up too. And the thing reacted. Without transition, it lunged toward their tent. Not running, darting. We heard grass hiss and a heavy thud, as if something had leapt and hit the ground. "Ilya!" I shouted, forgetting stealth. "Flashlights! Shine the flashlights!" Dima yelled, fumbling for his. But we were too late. Silence fell again. No struggle. No screams. Just silence. "Katya? Ilya?" I called. "We're here," Ilya answered. His voice was unnaturally calm, but hysteria vibrated beneath it. It's standing right next to us. By our heads. Dima and I exchanged a look. We had a small hatchet in our tent for firewood, but to reach it, we'd have to unzip the vestibule. And unzipping meant removing the only barrier between us and whatever was outside. We sat like that for 10 minutes. Each second felt endless. Cold seeped into my bones despite the warm night. Sweat ran down my spine like ice water. Then it came back to us. I didn't hear footsteps. I felt the air pressure change. As if something massive blocked the moonlight falling on the tent. A shadow covered us. Then came the sound of breathing. A deep, wet inhale. A whistling exhale. Right above the dome of the tent. It was tall. Very tall. If it stood beside us, its head was far above the tent. And then the worst began. It started touching the tent. Slowly. Almost gently. I watched the fabric bow under pressure, first from above, then from the side. These were not animal paws. The pressure point was small, like a fingertip. Creak, creak. A nail slid across the synthetic fabric. The sound was quiet, but in the night it was deafening. "It's checking," Dima whispered, barely moving his lips. His face was chalk white. "It's looking for an opening." The fabric bent inward right in front of my face. I recoiled, pressing into my sleeping bag. I saw the outline. It was a hand. But the fingers, they were too long. Inhumanly long, with extra joints. The hand slid downward, probing toward the ground, searching for the zipper. My heart stopped. If it found the pull tab. If it knew how to open zippers. That's when I remembered the fisherman's words. They check who doesn't belong. I grabbed the hatchet. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. Dima switched on his powerful flashlight and aimed it straight at the tent wall where the pressure was. The beam hit the fabric. We saw the silhouette. It was thin. Hunched. But the light seemed to frighten it. The shadow jerked upward and vanished. A sharp, guttural sound followed, something between a cough and a bark. Then came pounding footsteps, fast and retreating. It was running toward the lake. We heard it crashing through bushes, snapping branches. And then, a loud splash. We didn't sleep until dawn. We sat back to back, gripping hatchets and knives, flinching at every rustle of a falling leaf. Our phones, as expected, had no signal. Emergency calls wouldn't go through. We were alone. At 3:17 a.m., I remember because I checked my watch every 30 seconds, the sound stopped completely. The forest filled again with familiar noise, crickets chirped, an owl hooted. Life returned, as if a predator had left. When the first rays of sunlight touched the treetops, we dared to come out. Ilya and Katya emerged from their tent at the same time. Katya was crying, mascara smeared across her face. Ilya was pale, holding a flare gun he had forgotten to use during the night. We examined the camp. The ground around the tents was torn up. Moss shredded in clumps, as if something had stomped in place, undecided or enraged. But the worst awaited us closer to the water, on a strip of damp sand leading to the lake. Footprints. Bare footprints. Human. But the size, at least a European 50, maybe bigger. The toes were long, splayed wide, gouging into the mud like claws. The tracks led from the water to our camp. We followed them. The thing had come out of the lake, climbed the slope, circled our tents 3 times, we counted the loops in the crushed grass. The prints came right up to my tent, to the exact spot where I had seen the fabric bend. And then came the detail that made us pack up in 3 minutes and run without looking back. There were no footprints leading back to the lake. Only footprints toward us. The splash and the retreating steps we'd heard at the end of the night, the ground there was untouched. The moss pristine. Branches unbroken. It came from the water. It circled us. It touched us through thin fabric. But it didn't leave by land. When we reached the car, gasping, the same old fisherman stood in the parking lot. He smoked a cheap cigarette and looked at us with a sad, knowing smile. We threw our packs into the trunk. I couldn't help myself. I walked up to him, shaking with adrenaline and fear. "What was that?" I demanded. "What lives there?" He took a drag, exhaled smoke, and looked me straight in the eyes. "I told you not to go to that side. The land there is old. It remembers those who were before us." "But the footprints," I started. "They only went one way." "Where did it go?" The old man flicked the cigarette away and crushed it under his boot. "And what makes you think, son, that it left?" he said quietly. "Maybe it just stopped being visible. Or," he leaned closer, and the same stench of rot and stagnant water hit me, the exact smell I'd sensed that night. "Or it found what it was looking for and crawled inside." We drove away. We flew down the highway at 140, breaking every rule, desperate to put distance between ourselves and that cursed forest. In the car, no one spoke. But I noticed one thing. On the back seat, where Ilya sat, there was a smell. Faint. Almost imperceptible. Stagnant water. Wet earth. Ilya stared out the window and didn't say a word all the way to Moscow. We barely talk now. The group fell apart. But sometimes, when I wake at night to some random sound, I go to the window and look down at the street. And in the glow of the streetlights, I think I see a tall, hunched shadow standing still, staring up at my windows. It didn't leave. It's just waiting for the moment I turn off the lights and forget to close the zipper. Never ignore local warnings. And if you hear footsteps around your tent, don't pray that it's a person. Pray that it's an animal. An animal only wants your flesh. Whatever roams near Svetloyer wants something else. I stood at the edge of the black water, listening as the forest digested my scream. I shouted for no real reason, to release the tension, to prove to myself that I was here, that I existed in this endless darkness. I shouted, "Hey!" My voice flew into the thicket, struck the trunks of ancient oaks, and came back. But what returned turned my blood to ice. It wasn't my, "Hey!" It wasn't my tone. From deep in the forest, after a 3-second delay, came a distinct, damp child's whisper that sounded directly inside my head, as if someone were standing right behind me. The voice answered, "Don't come out." This happened in September 2014. And if you think an echo is just physics, a reflection of sound waves, then you've never been to that part of the Belavezhskaya Pushcha where we set up camp. Since then, I never shout in the forest. I'm afraid that next time it will answer even closer. Turn off the lights. Make yourself comfortable. This is a true story. We had already been driving for 4 hours. My father always considered himself a great woodsman, even though he'd spent his entire life working as an accountant in Minsk. His idea of manly upbringing was to drag my mother and me into some remote wilderness once a year, as far from civilization, the internet, and hot water as possible. That time, he chose the Belavezhskaya Pushcha. Not the tourist part with enclosures where bison lazily chew hay under camera lenses, but the wild northern edge of the reserve. My father sat behind the wheel of our old SUV, gripping it as if we were competing in the Dakar rally. My mother dozed in the passenger seat, clutching her bag of medicines to her chest, her eternal talisman against any trouble. I, a 16-year-old named Artyom, sat in the back with my forehead against the cold glass, watching giant fir trees swallow the last remnants of daylight. "Dad, we passed the campground sign 5 kilometers ago," I said, trying not to sound too annoyed. Campgrounds are for tourists, Tyoma, my father replied without slowing down. Tents packed together, kids screaming, music blasting. We're going for the real experience. I marked a great spot by a stream on the map. Quiet. No one around. We'll save on the fee and feel at one with nature. Being at one with nature, in my father's language, meant breaking national park rules and risking a fine, but arguing was pointless. Asphalt gave way to gravel, gravel to a rutted dirt road, and then we turned onto an overgrown clearing where branches lashed the sides of the car like whips. The forest here was different. Ancient. The trees stood so densely that perpetual twilight reigned between them. The trunks were coated in thick moss hanging in tatters, like the hide of a sick animal. When we finally stopped in a small clearing by a stream, the sun was almost gone. The silence that fell after the engine cut out was deafening. No birdsong. No insects. Only heavy, stagnant air smelling of rot and standing water. Well, here we are, my father said, getting out and spreading his arms wide, inhaling deeply. Beautiful, isn't it? Can you feel it? My mother stepped out after him, wrapping her cardigan tightly around herself. She looked around uneasily. Misha, it's kind of gloomy here. And damp. Look at the ground, it's all mud. That's not mud, Lena, that's soil, my father said cheerfully, pulling the tent from the trunk. Tyoma, help out. We need to hurry before dark. We set up camp in a rush. Dusk in the forest doesn't arrive gradually, it drops like a curtain. While we struggled with the stakes, the woods around us turned black. The stream, which had looked picturesque in the headlights, now resembled a black vein pulsing through the ground. The water didn't babble, it flowed almost silently, oily, sliding around submerged roots. When the fire finally caught, things felt a little cozier. The flames pulled nearby tree trunks out of the darkness, creating an illusion of safety. We ate canned food. My father drank a little cognac, to keep warm, and began telling his endless army stories. My mother relaxed, smiled, tossed branches into the fire. But I felt uneasy. I sat with my back to the forest and felt, on my skin, the colossal volume of emptiness behind me. Or not emptiness. I had an irrational, sticky feeling that the trees were standing too close. That they had taken a step forward while we were watching the fire. Around 11, my father yawned and stretched. Well, bedtime? We'll get up at dawn and look for bison tracks. My parents climbed into the tent. I stayed by the dying fire, staring into the embers. I needed to use the bathroom, but the idea of stepping away from the light was unbearable. In the city, darkness is just the absence of light. In the forest, darkness is the presence of something else. It's dense. It presses against your ears. I forced myself, took a flashlight, and walked about 15 meters from the camp to a cluster of hazel bushes. The beam jittered over the trunks, pulling strange shadows from the dark. I finished quickly and was about to head back when a strange, almost childish urge seized me, to test the acoustics. The silence was so absolute that it felt like if I didn't say something, I would disappear. I drew in a breath and shouted toward the black wall of trees. Not too loud, so as not to wake my parents, but strong enough to carry. Hey! Anyone there? The sound of my voice felt alien, sharp. It flew into the thicket. I waited for the usual fading repetition. Hey, hey, hey. The silence lasted 1 second. 2. 3. Then the forest answered. The sound didn't come from above, from the treetops where echoes usually wander. It came from below, at human height, from the dense undergrowth about 50 meters away. It wasn't my voice. Mine was the breaking baritone of a teenager. The reply was high, thin, trembling, like a child who had cried for a long time and was now trying to whisper. Come out, it rustled from the darkness. To me. The flashlight shook in my hand. The beam darted over the bushes, catching only tangled branches and dry grass. I froze, forgetting to breathe. My brain scrambled for a rational explanation. A bird? Some mocking jay? Wind creaking a trunk? Dad? I called quietly, not taking my eyes off the spot where the sound had come from. Silence. I took a step back. A branch cracked under my boot like a gunshot. And immediately, as if reacting to my movement, the voice sounded again, closer this time. Much closer. As if the speaker had made a massive leap through the darkness while I blinked. Artyom, the voice whispered. It was like an electric shock. It knew my name. This couldn't be an echo. It couldn't be a bird. Cold, pure terror flooded me. I spun around and bolted for the fire, not caring where I stepped, stumbling over roots. I burst into the circle of light, gasping. My parents weren't asleep yet, they were just settling in. My father poked his head out of the tent, unzipping it. "What are you running around like a moose for?" he grumbled. "You'll wake the whole forest." "Dad," I said, barely catching my breath. "There's someone out there. In the forest." My father frowned, climbing out of his sleeping bag. My mother looked over his shoulder, her face pale in the firelight. "What happened? Who did you see?" "I didn't see anyone," I said quickly, trying to steady my shaking hands. "I heard it." I shouted, just like that, and someone answered. A voice. A child's voice. It said my name. My father looked at me, then at the dark wall of forest, then back at me. Skepticism mixed with irritation in his eyes. "Tyoma, stop making things up. You're 16. A child's voice? We're 20 kilometers from the nearest village. I swear." I almost shouted. It said, "Come out to me." And then, "Artyom." "That was me," my father said, though his voice wavered. "I called you when you left. Maybe the echo distorted it. Or your mom." "Lena, did you call him?" My mother shook her head. "No, Misha. I didn't say anything." The three of us stood by the fire. The flames were dying down, the embers fewer, and the ring of darkness tightened around us. "Maybe it was other campers," my mother suggested uncertainly. "Lost? A child wandered off? At night?" In deadfall, my father snorted, but he pulled a powerful search flashlight and his hunting knife from the car. "Fine. I'll check. Just to calm you down." He aimed the beam toward the direction I'd come from. A white column of light cut through the darkness, illuminating trunks, bushes, ferns. Everything was still. No movement. No bright jackets of lost children. "Hey," my father shouted into the woods. "Anyone there?" The forest stayed silent. There wasn't even an echo. As if the trees absorbed the sound completely. "See," my father turned back to us, trying to smile, but it came out strained. No one. Wind in the canopy, a creaking tree. And the name, well, the brain fills in familiar sounds sometimes. Auditory pareidolia. "Let's go to sleep." I didn't believe him. I saw how tense his back was. I saw how he placed the knife not in the backpack, but by the tent entrance. But arguing was terrifying. To admit that someone really was out there meant going mad with fear. So we climbed into the tent. My father zipped it up, leaving only a narrow gap for ventilation. We lay down in our sleeping bags, parents on the sides, me in the middle. Normally I protested that kind of protectiveness, but that night I was grateful. My mother soon fell asleep, or pretended to. My father shifted for another 20 minutes, then his breathing evened out. I lay there with my eyes open, listening. The tent fabric was a thin barrier. Just a millimeter of nylon separated us from whatever was outside. At first, I heard water. Our camp was about 10 meters from the stream. The sound was quiet, rhythmic. Splash. 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 It wasn't the current. It was footsteps. Someone was walking through the water, slowly, carefully, moving upstream toward our camp. The sound grew louder. Slap. Slap. Someone stepped out of the water onto the bank. I went rigid, all hearing. My heart hammered so hard I was sure the whole forest could hear it. The footsteps changed, now wet slaps in mud. Squish. Squish. They weren't the heavy steps of an adult or an animal's hooves. They were light. Quick. They stopped. Silence. Then came rustling again, now very close, by the dead fire. Someone was walking around our camp. I heard a coal crack in the fire pit. I heard the kettle we'd left there clink. I reached out and squeezed my father's shoulder. He woke instantly, jerking, but I pressed a finger to my lips, begging him to stay quiet. He froze. He heard it too. Breathing. It was right outside the tent wall, by my head. Hoarse, broken breathing, whistling on the exhale, as if the lungs of whoever stood there were full of water. The tent fabric slowly bowed inward. I saw it in the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. Someone pressed against the nylon from outside. The imprint was small. A hand. A child's hand with splayed fingers. It slowly slid down the fabric, making a disgusting, whispering sound. My mother whimpered in her sleep. The hand froze. Then the same voice, the one I'd heard in the forest, whispered directly into my ear through the thin fabric. Cramped. It wasn't a question. It was a complaint. The voice sounded offended and angry. Cramped, down there. My father snapped. His nerves gave out. He roared, grabbed the flashlight and knife, and yanked the tent zipper open in one violent motion. Get the hell out of here, he screamed, stumbling outside. My mother and I scrambled after him, blinded by panic. My father swung the flashlight in every direction. The beam leapt across the clearing, bushes, trees. No one. Nothing. The camp looked exactly as we'd left it, except the kettle had been knocked over. Where are you? Come out, you cowards, my father yelled, but his voice broke into a shriek. Misha, let's go, my mother sobbed. Please, let's leave right now. Yes, my father said, breathing hard, his face slick with sweat. We're leaving. Now. Forget the tent. To the car. He shone the flashlight on the ground to find the keys he'd dropped when climbing out. And that's when we all saw it. The beam lit the mud around the tent entrance. The ground was trampled. There were hundreds of footprints. Small, bare children's feet. Everywhere. They came out of the stream, circled the fire pit, and formed a tight ring around the tent. The prints were fresh, still filled with water. But the most terrifying thing wasn't how many there were. The footprints led only toward the tent. Not a single one led back into the forest. To the car, my father shouted, grabbing my mother's hand. We ran for the SUV. Those 10 meters felt like a marathon. I was sure someone was grabbing my ankles, that wet, cold hands were reaching for me from the dark. We jumped inside and slammed the doors. My father shoved the key into the ignition with shaking hands. The engine coughed and died. Come on, my father shouted, pounding the steering wheel. And then the forest spoke. This time it wasn't an echo. It was a chorus. From all sides, from behind every tree, from bushes, from the darkness itself, voices came. Dozens of them. Different tones, but all childish, all distorted, as if gurgling through water. Don't go. Play with us. Take us. It's cold. They didn't shout. They whispered, but the whisper drowned out the wind. My father turned the key again. The engine roared to life. He switched on the high beams and floored the gas. The car lurched forward, wheels spinning in the mud. In the headlights, for a split second before we burst onto the clearing, I saw them. They stood at the forest's edge. Pale, almost glowing figures. Small, no taller than a meter. They stood motionless, arms hanging limp. Their faces were blurred, as if erased, but where their mouths should have been yawned black, unnaturally large holes. They didn't chase us. They just watched. We tore down the forest road, not caring about potholes. The suspension groaned, branches lashed the windows, as if the forest were trying to hold us back. We burst onto the asphalt after 20 minutes, though the drive-in had taken an hour. My father didn't stop until we reached a 24-hour gas station on the Brest-Moscow highway. There, under bright lights, surrounded by truckers, we finally breathed again. In the morning, we went to the park administration. My father wanted to file a report, start a scandal, claim there was some cult or gang of vagrants in the forest. An old ranger met us, a man with a face like oak bark. He listened to my father's rambling story without interrupting. When my father mentioned the footprints and the voices, the ranger sighed heavily and removed his cap. "You're lucky you didn't go out to them," he said quietly. "And that you didn't let the boy." "Who were they?" my father demanded. "Local troublemakers?" The ranger shook his head. "You were near the Black Stream? That's where the swamps begin, the Rotten Hollow. In the 80s, back in Soviet times, a group of pioneer kids vanished there. A teacher took them hiking, tried to cut the route short. A downpour started, the water rose instantly. They got stuck in the bog. They searched for a week. Only the backpacks were found." He looked straight at me. His gaze was heavy, knowing. "Locals don't go there. They say the forest there is greedy. It doesn't just take. It wants replacements. When you shout there, the forest doesn't answer with an echo. They answer. They're looking for someone new to trade places with, to get out." We left that same day. We abandoned the tent, the sleeping bags, everything. My father sold that SUV a week later. He never took us camping again. But the worst part isn't that. 10 years have passed. I live in the city now, on the 9th floor. Far from forests and swamps. But sometimes, when I wake up thirsty in the middle of the night and walk into the kitchen in complete silence, I'm afraid to make any sound at all. Because a few months ago, I dropped a cup. It shattered with a loud crash. And from the ventilation shaft, softly but clearly, came a whisper. "For luck. Artyom." The voice was wet. And childish. They didn't stay in the forest. The echo came with me. I will never forget that silhouette. A broad, hunched back wrapped in old canvas, motionless as stone. He was sitting so close to the fire that the flames should have been licking his face, yet he didn't move. Not a sound. Not even the hint of breathing. Only the crackle of branches, the very branches we ourselves had gathered. The most terrifying part wasn't that someone was sitting there. The most terrifying part was that 3 hours earlier my brother and I had personally doused that fire with water and buried it under earth, making sure not a single ember remained. And now it was roaring as if someone had fed it gasoline. And the man by the fire was waiting for us to come out of the tent. If you think mountains are a place to relax, you're wrong. Mountains forgive nothing. Especially the Carpathians. Especially at night. This isn't some internet creepypasta. This is what made me sell all my hiking gear and swear never to go higher than the 3rd floor again. Turn off the lights. Make yourself comfortable. This is a true story. It all started with an idea from my younger brother, Dima. He was 22, I was 26. July, 2019. We decided that standard routes were for amateurs and that we needed a real man's experience. Our destination was the Kornahara Range, specifically Mount Pip Ivan Kornohersky. Anyone who's been to the Carpathians knows the place. At the summit stands an old Polish observatory known as the White Elephant, a massive stone structure, castle-like, battered by every wind imaginable. Beautiful, but with a heavy, oppressive atmosphere. We set out from the village of Zembronia early in the morning. The weather was perfect, but our packs weighed a ton. As always, Dima was bursting with enthusiasm, pushing us forward, cracking jokes, filming everything. I was more pragmatic, concerned about water, a place to camp, and the fact that we were already slipping behind schedule. By evening we were up on the ridge, about 1,800 meters above sea level. Not a soul around. Just endless waves of mountains fading into bluish haze, and the wind that never seems to stop up there. We planned to reach the observatory, but the sun began to set faster than we expected. The temperature dropped sharply. It had been plus 20 degrees Celsius during the day, now our breath steamed in the air. "Let's camp here," I said, pointing to a shallow hollow between two rocky outcrops. It was slightly off the trail, in a patch of dwarf mountain pine, dense, tangled shrubs that offered some shelter from the wind. Dima agreed. Exhausted to the point of trembling legs, we dropped our packs. While I pitched the tent, my brother went to look for firewood. At that altitude, wood is scarce, mostly dry, twisted branches of mountain pine. They burn hot but fast. We spent about an hour combing the area to gather a decent pile. It needed to last through the evening and, more importantly, until morning, to heat canned meat and boil tea. Starting the fire wasn't easy. The wind kept trying to snuff it out, but once it caught, things felt almost cozy. We sat there eating buckwheat with meat, drinking tea spiked with cognac, and staring at the stars. There were so many of them it made my head spin. The silence was so deep it rang in my ears. No birds. No insects. Just wind in the rocks and the crackle of our fire. Around 11, we decided to turn in. In the mountains there's a simple rule: if you leave or go to sleep, you put the fire out. One spark carried by the wind can ignite dry grass in seconds. "I'll take care of it," I told Dima. I didn't just pee on the embers like some people do. I poured out the remaining technical water from our bottle, knocked down the flames, and then Dima and I together buried the fire pit under damp soil and sod we dug up nearby. No smoke. No heat. Just a mound of dirty earth. We climbed into the tent and zipped our sleeping bags. Dima passed out almost instantly. I lay awake for a while, listening to the wind tug at the tent fabric. Thoughts about work, loans, and everyday nonsense drifted through my head. Eventually exhaustion won, and I sank into a deep, heavy sleep without dreams. I woke up abruptly, as if someone had jabbed me in the side. I opened my eyes and for a few seconds couldn't understand where I was. Darkness. The tight cocoon of the sleeping bag. Cold air. I listened. Dima was breathing evenly beside me. I checked my backlit watch, 2:37 a.m. What woke me? A sound? I lay perfectly still, barely daring to breathe. And then I smelled it. This wasn't the scent of cooling ash. It was the sharp, rich smell of burning resinous wood, fresh smoke. Then I saw it. The walls of our tent were glowing orange. The tent fabric was thin, yellowish, and now it was lit from the outside, pulsing rhythmically the way it does when a large fire burns nearby. Shadows of grass blades danced across the sloping roof. My brain refused to accept it. We had extinguished the fire. We had buried it. It couldn't reignite on its own. It was physically impossible. For it to glow like that, the flames had to be at least half a meter high. My first thought was rational, a wildfire. We hadn't put it out properly, the wind had fanned it, and now we were about to burn alive. I sat up sharply, unzipping my sleeping bag. The sound of the zipper seemed deafening in the night. I shook Dima. "Dima, wake up. Fire." He groaned, confused. I reached toward the tent exit. My hand froze a centimeter from the zipper of the outer fly. Through the semi-transparent fabric of the vestibule, I saw a silhouette. Someone was sitting by our fire. Right in front of the tent entrance, about 3 meters away. The shadow was sharp and clear. The person was crouching or sitting on a low rock, back to us, face toward the fire. He was completely still. I was hit by icy paralysis, the kind where fear becomes a physical pain in your gut. We were at 1,800 meters. A day's walk from the nearest village. Surrounded by wild mountains. Who could come here at 2:30 in the morning and just sit by our fire? Dima finally woke up fully, saw the orange glow in my wide eyes. "Sonia, what the?" he started loudly. I clamped my hand over his mouth in terror and pressed a finger to my lips. "There's someone there," I whispered. "Quiet." Dima looked at the tent wall. The silhouette didn't move. The fire crackled loudly, confidently, as if someone were feeding it. "Maybe a ranger," my brother mouthed. His eyes held the same animal fear I felt. At night? Without a flashlight? And why isn't he saying anything? We sat like that for maybe 5 minutes. 5 eternities. Our legs went numb, the cold seeped into our bones, but we were afraid to move, afraid even to make the foam mats creak. The silhouette remained motionless. He didn't warm his hands, adjust his clothes, or smoke. He just stared into the fire. His shoulders looked unnaturally broad, and it seemed like he had a hood or some kind of cape over his head. "Hey!" I shouted. My voice cracked and came out thin and pathetic. "Who's there?" Silence. Just the crackling logs. The silhouette didn't flinch. Didn't even turn its head. Complete disregard. That scared me more than if he'd started screaming or rushing the tent. It wasn't human behavior, or it was the behavior of someone with very bad intentions. "Where's your knife?" Dima asked. "In the pack, in the vestibule. To get it, we'd have to open the zipper." "I'll open it," Dima said, impulsive as always, reaching for the pull. "Wait," I grabbed his hand. "What if there are 2 of them? What if this is bait?" But we couldn't wait forever. The fire was burning too brightly, and sooner or later someone would do something. Dima yanked his hand free, grabbed the zipper pull, and ripped it down. The sound of the zipper tearing open sliced through the night. Cold air and blazing firelight flooded into the tent. We froze, staring outside. The fire was roaring. Flames leapt nearly a meter high. This wasn't a weak flicker, it was a furious, powerful column of fire. But there was no one there. Nothing. Just stones lit by orange light, darkness beyond the circle of firelight, and no one. Where did he go? Dima breathed, grabbing a powerful flashlight and sweeping the beam through the shrubs. The light pulled twisted pine branches, gray boulders, and grass out of the darkness. No one. Not a soul. Did he run? I asked, crawling out of the tent with a camping hatchet in my hand. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. Where to? We'd have heard footsteps. It's all scree here. Dima was right. You can't move silently on loose rock. We stood back to back, lighting up the darkness around the camp. The wind whistled in our ears. It felt like hundreds of eyes were watching us just beyond the light. But the strangest thing was the fire. I stepped closer. It was our firewood. The very branches we'd worked so hard to collect for the morning. Our entire reserve pile, which we'd stacked under a large rock 5 meters away, was gone. Someone had carried it all to the fire and burned it. But how? The soil we'd buried the embers under was torn apart, as if someone had dug it away with bare hands to reach the heat. "Sash, look," Dima's voice trembled. He wasn't shining the flashlight into the bushes, but straight into the center of the fire. "What is it?" "In the ash. Near the edge." I squinted. Among the glowing coals, where the flames weren't as strong, something pale stood out. It didn't look like stone or wood. I took a stick and rolled the object out of the fire onto the grass. We shone the light on it. It was a tooth. A human tooth. A molar. With long, yellowish roots. It wasn't charred, just lightly blackened, as if it had been thrown into the fire very recently. Or as if it had fallen out of something that was burning. I almost vomited. "Whose tooth is that, Sash?" Dima backed toward the tent. "Let's get out of here. Let's pack up and leave. Right now." Where would we go? At night? Along the ridge? We'd break our necks in 100 meters. "I'm not staying here. We're not going anywhere." I shouted at him, trying to snap him back to reality. We wait until dawn. With the hatchet and knives. By the fire. The rest of the night was the longest of my life. We didn't go back into the tent. We sat on rocks, pressed against each other, staring into the darkness. The fire kept burning, devouring our morning supplies, but there was nothing left to add. Every rustle, every gust of wind made us flinch. I constantly thought I saw that same broad back in a canvas cloak at the edge of the light, circling us. I kept looking at the tooth lying on a stone. It looked too real. Too large. At some point, around 4 a.m., when the sky began to pale, I thought I heard singing. Very quiet, low, like the hum of a live power line. It didn't come from any direction, it seemed to rise from beneath the ground itself. Dima heard it too. He squeezed my shoulder so hard it left bruises. We didn't move until the sun touched the mountain peaks. As soon as it was light enough, we packed in 5 minutes. No breakfast. No tea. We just shoved our things into our packs any which way. Before leaving, I wanted to bury the tooth. But when I looked at the stone where it had been, it was gone. "Did you take the tooth?" I asked my brother. "Are you insane? I wouldn't touch that filth." The tooth had vanished. Just like the man. We practically ran downhill. We forgot about the observatory, the summit, all our plans. We descended to the first kalaba, a summer shepherd's hut where they make cheese. An old Hutzel man was there, smoking a pipe and squinting at us. We must have looked completely unhinged. We asked for water. He gave it to us. I couldn't hold back and, stumbling over my words, told him about the night visitor. About the fire that reignited on its own. About the silhouette in the cloak. I didn't mention the tooth, I was afraid he'd think we were crazy. The old man listened without interrupting. When I finished, he spat on the ground and crossed himself. "Don't go camping on Pip Ivan anymore, boys," he said hoarsely. "Especially not in July." "Who was it?" Dima asked. "A tourist? A poacher?" "A tourist," the shepherd smirked, but his eyes didn't smile. "Up there are places where you mustn't put a fire out. And places where you mustn't light one at all. You lit it where you shouldn't have. And then you begrudged the firewood." "We didn't begrudge it, we saved it for the morning. So he came to take what was his. He's the keeper of the Vatra, the fire. He loves warmth. And even more, he loves the teeth of those who lie to the fire." The old man fell silent and turned away, making it clear the conversation was over. What if we'd gone out to him earlier? I asked his back. He stopped, but didn't turn around. Then in the morning the shepherds would have found not a tooth by the fire, but 2 charred skulls. You were lucky he was already fed. We left that same day. I don't go into the mountains anymore. But even now, waking up at night in my apartment in Kiev, I sniff the air. And sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, I think I smell smoke. And the smell of old, burned bone. And one more thing. Recently, Dima went to the dentist. They took an X-ray of his jaw. The doctor stared at it for a long time, then asked, "Dmitri, when did you have your lower right 6th tooth removed?" Dima was surprised. "I never had anything removed. All my teeth are there." The doctor shook his head and turned the screen. Where the lower molar should have been, there was nothing. The bone had grown over as if the tooth had been gone for many years. But Dima swears the tooth was there. And I remember that it was. That night on the mountain, we didn't just see a ghost. We paid a toll. We just didn't realize it until now. If you're ever in the Carpathians and you see a fire that no one lit, don't go near it. And for God's sake, don't try to put it out. Let it burn.